Cool. How's everybody doing? So, Steve, do you want to hop in right on the talk about the release?
Sure. So, current plan is to get the release candidate out this week. Of course, this week is near getting towards the end. This will be for 6.1. We're still targeting having the GA, which is the final release of 6.1, at the end of this month. Currently, I guess what I'll mention is we're keeping the bar pretty high for changes we're taking for RC, so don't expect that we'll have significant or many changes at all, ideally, between RC and GA. What the difference is for that time frame is really allowing the community any sound.
There was one person that said they're not getting sound. Some people have said that, but I think others have said that they can hear us just fine.
In general, for anyone who doesn't get sound, what I found is if you disconnect and reconnect, sometimes that works.
Cool.
All right. Anyways, so for the RC release, effectively the PRs that are happening on the repo, you should assume that by default they're going to go to 6.2, unless you feel it's something that, like for ones that you're contributing to the community. If you feel like it's something that is necessary for the 6.1 release, you need to go and CC me and Joey, and we can make that decision. But we want to really not take any more changes fundamentally, other than compliance reasons or packaging reasons, things that we need so that we can support 6.1 as a stable release going forward between RC and GA. But what we want is to have opportunity when we get the RC out to get some community feedback, so if there's any blockers for you or any major issues that would prevent you from adopting 6.1 as a stable release, then let us know that we can still have opportunity to make those changes before we GA. Otherwise, again, we're going to try to ship every 6 months in spring and fall timeframe. So if it doesn't make it in 6.1, it's not the end of the world. It will show up at least in 6.2 preview, and it will show up in the next 6.2 stable in about 6 months timeframe.
You're Steve L-MSFT, right?
Yes.
Okay. Cool. Awesome. So I can just jump into the command line coverage if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
So we've been talking about this a little bit already, which is basically that in the last couple months we've been working with Windows partner teams to validate and port their modules to PowerShell Core. We had a tweet about a month and a half ago saying that the new Active Directory module that ships in RSAT, FOD, and Insider builds supports PowerShell Core, but we have a number of other modules that support PowerShell Core as well. So I don't know. I'm actually going to stop sharing super temporarily because I need to pull up a okay, right VM here. My apologies, but I just want to show this super fast just to give you guys a sense of what we've been doing here. So this is, again, I haven't done my homework yet to know which Insider build this is going to show up on. I see me, okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to find out the scaling is all bunk, but hopefully this is readable. We can open PWSH. Wow, okay, this is huge now. So this is PowerShell Core. If I can just do the, oh my god, okay, this kind of worked. So as you can see, I'm operating inside of PowerShell Core. Wow. There we go. This is a nightly build of PowerShell Core from yesterday. I'm running a later version of the RS5 release branch that'll come out via an Insider build at some point. But if I run a get module list available, we'll see that I have a number of modules that would, and this is stock PS Core instance. So I've just installed it. I haven't changed my PS module path. I haven't downloaded any of the compatibility modules, anything like that. And you'll see all of these modules that are sitting inside of System32 are marked as both core and desktop compatible. So this is with a bunch of roles and features installed, not quite all of them, but you'll see a bunch of these show up here. And that, when we run get command and we pipe that to measure, you will see that we now have 1,643 commandlets, as opposed to the roughly, I think, 2,700 that are available in Windows PowerShell. But really, a big number that we're pretty happy with.
Tiny window.
Yeah, a big number that we're really happy with, and we're hoping that this definitely unblocks PowerShell core adoption and gets people to a place where they can start to take a harder dependency on PowerShell core and use it as their primary entry point. We still obviously have the compatibility module that we've built that is going to help out on down-level platforms, because again, all of these module manifests have been marked inside of Windows. So, on down-level platforms, these are not going to magically be compatible because these were changes we had to make to Windows itself. But we do have that compatibility module, and we've got some ideas around how it will, for instance, automatically opt all CDXML modules into being compatible, because we know that those work and haven't seen any problems in our SIM adapter. Similarly, we may start to maintain a whitelist with the help of the community for various operating systems where we may not formally support those modules, but we can say that the module, as far as the community can tell, is working on Win 7 or 2008 R2, for instance. So that's a path we want to go down, but we don't have a time. Anything to add?
I think the only thing I add is, again, if you saw my blog post, this is a journey. This is just more like the beginning than the end. So we'll continue doing this work. We're also going to work with other Microsoft partners outside of Windows to get some coverage. So, it's going to take some time.
Yeah, this is not an effort like the 1600 number is not one where we go, cool, we did it, we're done. It's, the start, and it helps make the conversation easier across the board with teams that are looking at supporting PowerShell core compatibility. So, it's a big number, and we're happy that we've hit that number, because it does start to give us some momentum going into more and more coverage. And the next session is 10. That being said, do we have anything else in direct PowerShell land? We can hop into the chat here and see if anybody's.
I've been watching it.
What's the story around identifying module support core on Linux and Windows versus just Windows, right? So it's a great question. So today, all of these modules are in-box Windows modules, right? Which means that they really don't make any sense in the Linux world. There's they're in-box. The only delivery vehicle where they're supported is via Windows, so they're not gallery shipping modules. But we do want to have some way to say that a module is both supported on an operating system and supported on an edition of PowerShell, because in the future there will certainly be modules that, if there are not already, that support only Windows or even only Linux. For instance, the cron job example that we shipped back in the 6.0 alpha like a year and a half ago, that thing is never going to work on Windows because you don't have cron on Windows. So I think, do we have the module manifest field for operating system?
No.
Okay.
Nope.
So we didn't put that in explicitly. It will probably.
The only thing we have right now is a tag, which is in the private data section.
Yep, which is OS underscore.
Which is documentative.
It's informational.
Yeah, information. That's a better word.
It's not. There's nothing enforcing it.
Right. Right. So today we have, to reiterate that, we have a tag in the PS private data that is informational to the gallery. Does the gallery puts the operating systems thing in the description?
It's a tag. No, it's actually a tag.
Okay, it just shows up as a tag, but it's a standardized tag.
Yeah. So what we documented a while back in the in the gallery documentation, the tags that we would prefer people use to be consistent, and I'll grab that link and post it. But again, it's informational, and it's entirely up to the module author to get right.
Right, so there's no tab completion. The problem here is that basically when we add any kind of manifest field, if we don't go back and make that manifest field supported on lower versions of PowerShell, and even if we do, you still need to get that update in order for that thing to work. Excuse me, that module won't import at all, right? So if there's we have compatible PS Edition. If we had, compatible OS, then that module will never work on Windows. And I think that right now our story is that we want to have modules that are universal to Windows PowerShell, PowerShell Core, and PowerShell Core on Linux, right? So there's that spectrum, and if we drop Windows PowerShell from that matrix at some point in the future, it might make sense to have an explicit manifest tag. But I think in the meantime, it's going to have to be a PS private data. Obviously, we want that PS private data tag to become more utilized by both the gallery, PowerShell Get. There are ways we can make it more accessible and discoverable, and stuff we can do in the VS Code tooling that will suggest it to you. New module manifests can put a comment in there. But really, I don't think that we're going to have anything enforcing compatibility after something's been installed. So let's see here. We've got some oh man, you guys got some good stuff. Holy. So how will the rest of the modules? Hopefully that answered that question. I just want to make sure I didn't miss any above. So I think I answered Jeremy's question. How will the rest of the modules be rolled out to Win 10 2019? Monthly patches, semi-annual, major update, other. It will be in the next major update.
I already responded to that.
Yeah, but we should just capture it on the audio. What exactly did you say here? Your own insiders, you'll get it. Maybe it'll show up in the final version of the next release. Yeah. So, but the important part there is that it's not being backported to the long-term servicing channel releases, right? So this is. I think the Redstone stuff is all out in the open now. This is RS5 and above. So it's not. None of the existing releases are going to get servicing updates with these module manifest changes. Did see that PowerShell is in AWS Lambda now. I think that they were waiting for some that PowerShell SDK that I tweeted about, and actually just for the call, 6.0.4 that we released last week was the first version of PowerShell to have a Microsoft.PowerShell.SDK released to NuGet.org rather than MyGet.org. So if anybody has compliance requirements like Amazon may have, in terms of shipping a product built on top of NuGet dependencies, that should unblock you. Why aren't implementations like cron versus task scheduler hidden behind one commandlet? I think there's two short answers to that. One is it's really hard, and the other is that we haven't had much time or a whole lot of demand for it right now. I'm certainly unopposed to people being able to do that. I think it would be awesome if we universal set of commandlets for system level administration. But I think the reality is that there's very different paradigms underneath, and having, for instance, a single with a set of properties that is conformant and useful and maps to the constructs at the lower layer in both Windows and Linux is just really hard to do. And it's even harder to do if we try to graft the Linux concept onto the existing types without. I would love to see somebody in the community pop up an experiment for this where they try to do a get scheduled task, for instance, queries both cron and the Windows task scheduler, but it's just not something we're looking at right now.
Didn't we do?
We had a demo. We had a demo with the 6.0 release.
Right.
Actually, I did that work, and one of the challenges I had is the semantics and the syntax are fundamentally different between task scheduler and cron, where conceptually they're just scheduling stuff on a schedule, but they work so differently that if you build an abstraction, you're going to limit use of both of them.
Right. Or you're going to end
up you have two different sets of commands
with the same name. Parameter sets.
Yeah.
And so
parameter sets will just mask the fact that you have two different sets of commands.
Right. Basically. So it's there's stop computer, restart computer. We can do them with stuff like that, but it's just as soon as you try to do anything useful at the higher level,
This is Darwin, who I submitted the one about this task scheduler too. Yeah. I think the task scheduler commandlets got way too complicated with requiring different objects for every subset of data that was inside the task scheduler or possible to configure. Whereas I keep using schedgetasks.exe because it's just simpler, like cron. So I also wonder if if the scheduled task commandlets were republished and unwound so that some of that object complexity could be just made a single flat set of parameters instead of create this object, now link them all together in this object, which maybe overly reflects what's going on under the covers.
Yeah, I mean, we have lots of commandlets, unfortunately, that are out there that require this like construction of objects. I'm not super familiar with those commandlets, but know the pattern that you're talking about. The difficulty with these things is always that we have a thing that's shipping in a Windows that's supported for 10 plus years, and you really have three options. You either make that the one forever and you tell everyone tough. You ship two side by side, and you sort of like we did with the WMIV1 and the sim commandlets. And you tell everyone, hey, great, there's this new one to use, and we won't break you with the old one. We're not touching the old one. Or you ship that new thing as a gallery module, and you tell people that it's way better and more convenient, but obviously the discoverability is going to be lower, and you're I'm.
Well, let me I'll just add one thing here. So Darwin, I think that what I would ask is if you could actually author an RFC that kind of just captures the top use cases for scheduled task / cron. Because I feel like there's no need to have a command that covers 100% of the capability. Like there's existing tools already. It's just an abstraction over it. In that case, we could figure out how to have that simplified abstraction for the most common use cases for both Windows and Linux and potentially Mac OS. Like to me, that kind of makes sense and something I would support.
Yeah, that sounds interesting because like my team writes parity code on both systems. We write scripts for doing installs that then it gets encapsulated in various different orchestration systems. And so then when we get to the PowerShell level and all of a sudden we still have this divide for simple things like restarting, it just seems a little bit odd. So yeah, that sounds very interesting, like a new one that kind of stays at a level that's like 90% of what people need as one.
Just taking these notes here.
Yeah, I was just going to quickly mention that task scheduling is such in a server DevOps world, it's such a common thing we have to resort to that it's also not like it's some edge case part of the OS you hardly ever need to configure or touch.
No, and it's like the ones we always hear is like storage networking, and that stuff scares the crap out of me in terms of, I mean, even just coming up with a commandlet that's universal on Linux for that sort of thing is hard, although systemd is proving to make its way through the little, and the systemd likes to them too when that stuff first got launched. But yeah, I think that like scheduled tasks, certainly restarting the computer is one that I think we can just do. But
can we construct? Pardon my ignorance, but can we construct? I guess we could construct script-backed commandlets that are using mostly native commands on Linux if someone wanted to get really crazy with the.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I will point. I'll actually just throw it in the chat right now. This was the original cron demo that Steve tried to make universal, and ultimately, was Linux only. But this is just basically wrapping and regexing the cron output. Maybe uses XArgs or something like that. But
I keep in mind, like one of the things I learned through that experience is that cron on different distros is also different. Mm-hmm. So that made it even more complicated.
Everything on different distros is different.
Yes, but I think if we can focus on like what are the top scenarios, I think that would be more of a success story than trying to figure out how do we have a complete abstraction over this stuff.
Yes, let's define top scenario that we are useful to be universal. Cool.
Yeah, and this would also apply to the ACWL discussion I see.
Do we need an RFC, or should we just do this in an issue and then do an RFC later? It's easier to contribute to the issue, I think.
I know this is a kind of like a recurring theme on kind of like efficiency on some of the discussion.
I mean, I am always fine doing an issue, having people throw all kinds of design proposals in the issue, and then someone just summarizing the issue into an
I'm interested
RFC.
in the design, I'm more interested in the problems.
I think for the discussion,
right?
For the discussion, I think an issue would definitely work a lot better than spending time on RFC where it may morph completely different. So I agree with that.
Can you maybe just create one, like just discussion on universal issues right now, and then I'll throw it in the notes by the end of the meeting?
Is there already an RFC for assessment of needs rebooting to be built into core?
Say that one more time.
Is there already something that exists to ask for the testing of whether a system needs rebooting built into as a built-in commandlet?
So determine if it needs a reboot because of like updates and stuff like that?
Well, there's 6 reasons on Windows and like 2 or 3 on Linux.
Sure.
I don't think so. No, I don't think that issue exists. I don't like.
Okay. Thank you.
The is
I don't recall
needed
that.
flag that like DISM throws and all kinds of other things throw,
Yeah,
and then like you just go pick it up from all the places.
Yeah, there's a gallery script which works pretty well, but then I always get from the Linux community, oh, it never needs rebooting, and then almost we have tons of machines that end up in a reboot state because they do yum update all and they can't reboot with scaling. So it would just be really cool to have something that the common wisdom of the entire community is able to go against for all the different reasons why, and get one feedback or individual breakdowns. The gallery solution is great in that it gives you either a 1 true false, or if you want the detail of which subcomponentry is requiring the reboot, it will give you that detail as well.
Yeah, so I think the uber point I want to make on that is that like we are never going to be able to make the excellent thing that spans all the distros for tasks like that, right? Like we could if one of them or 2 of them were the absolute top priority. But the reality is that those things are useful because there's a lot of people using a lot of distros and a lot of versions of different operating systems across the community that are willing to contribute the small conditional fixes that make it work on the one weird, distro version. So, like, one of the things I think I want people on the call to think about is like, is it more useful for us to take the reins and spend time away from PowerShell maintaining modules and scripts like that and merging the pull requests from the community that deal with the long tail of those differences? Or should we sort of give the reins more to the community to own that sort of thing? And then at some point when we see that it's reached a certain threshold, we bless it and or include it with PowerShell or recommend it or whatever. But really, yeah, go ahead.
I would say 2 things, Joey. One is fundamental commandlets like scheduled jobs, needs a reboot the computer. It's hard to have to reach out and pull those. It's kind of a pain. Like it should be built in from just that aspect alone. They're
basically
so
the statement you're making is the bootstrap, exactly. Okay.
And then the second issue though is if you do turn it over to the community, it would be awesome to have a script commandlet template that shows us, if it might be out there already, that shows us how to branch based on Linux and Windows in the most reliable way, so that we could write a needs rebooting and grab the gallery code, dump it in there, and then dump all the in Linux distro breakouts in there as well. But to get started with how do you reliably branch in the background for something like this that's universal would be really handy.
Cool. Okay, I like that. All right, I'm going to move on here to some more questions because I think we've spent some good time on this. This is very useful, though.
I created the issue so you can find it in the chat later.
Awesome. These are the recommended tags. Cool. I'll try to get this into this is for...
Questions on DSC core.
Yeah, I know we were going to try and get Michael on this call. I was not able to this time around. So I apologize for that. Steve L, I had reconnect and I lost all the conversation thread.
I know this.
We'll get you back up to speed. Darwin, set ACL commandlet is like that. Still prefer iCackles. Yep. When I say it, iCackles, it just sounds funny. Like the model of abstracting the OS specific commands away in a configuration management resource for scheduling is a single thing, but it does different commands OS things and other. Yeah, I think that's the pattern we want to follow. It's just a matter of like which things and who drives it, right? And I totally grok the closer it is to bootstrapping, the more likely it is that it should be built into PowerShell. But one person's I need this for bootstrapping is another person's I never touch that ever. So it's tricky. Distro platform specific, Mark, I think is totally you're saying make it pluggable so that we have the plugins for distro platform specific. So in other words, like it'd be nice if maybe, I don't know, we use like PowerShell classes with interfaces, and then you could like implement the interface for your distro and have like, Red Hat. Yeah, go
that's
ahead.
a high level idea, is just having interfaces so we can plug in whatever interface into it, just derive from whatever interface type, and then create the distro and platform specific code within that, and then the top level codes can do that, and the community can then submit their own pluggable interfaces for that, or have their own esoteric ones for their own environments. It's kind of what I was looking at for the invoke download commandlet too.
Got it. Yeah, the trickiness there is that like you got to get the interface right, because in a lot of cases it's going to be like the kinds of properties on the return object and that sort of thing. But I do think you're right that those are generally going to be
detecting the distro isn't a simple problem either.
Detecting the distro. Yeah.
Well, that itself could be a plugin.
Well, I did that in the install PowerShell.shell, and that could be expanded, but it seemed like it was capable of
We
quite
do
a
a lot
few
of that
already. It's code. I nabbed that code off the net. I didn't, and then I had to refine it a bit.
Yeah, no, we should look into that. I think that's a reasonable thing, because it's usually once you get down to the distro specific stuff, it's less the output and it's more like where stuff is stored or what the command is specifically called on that distro or whatever, as opposed to like
What version they have
Yeah.
being maintained.
But I think generally speaking, like you can expect, even different implementations of cron to like, use the same like cron tab format or whatever.
I don't know how much code, top level code that would reuse there would be.
Right.
That'd be very thin commandlet that just called into these classes.
Right.
So you might, rather than having the complexity of extra files and plugins, it might just be easier to write, this is the version of the file for the module for this, and this is the module for that. Might actually end up being simpler. I mean, Exchange used base classes for commandlets of C#. So you'd have a base class that had a pattern, and then you specialize the behavior. And we could do that for this as well, but I don't think there'd be very much behavior in the base class.
Yeah, I think it's more about like in my mind, it's more about the return type, for example, a well-known set of properties that you depend on when you're scripting. Like that a pipeline will work regardless of which distro you're on.
Yeah, and that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Certainly tricky for using classes because of fixed return types on functions. Just make everything object, I suppose.
Yeah, that wouldn't be awesome. We should look into it. I think it's totally a reasonable thing to discuss. We've got this here. That's not it. Why is it not copy pasting? Sorry, guys. Yay. Okay. Cool. What else do we have in the chat here? Max fun with special config files. Maybe meta issue for what commandlets should be considered a baseline. Yeah, that was actually the one I meant. Steve was like one that people could ask for things that we would want. I think you were talking about like what kind of things would be useful as universal. But we can. I mean, the schedule test one's useful too.
Because really, we're trying to make PowerShell smaller out of the box rather than larger.
Yes.
And
You might have like another meta module, like core OS management.
yeah,
Like
you
that.
have PowerShell profiles.
Yeah.
Nightmares of sim profiles. Or you can have something like Anaconda, for example. That is the super uber packaging of Python.
Okay.
It has absolutely everything. That isn't Python. It's a separate distributed thing that
Yeah.
people can grab.
No, and we've talked about this. I don't know that we've ever talked about this on the call, but this is something that really desirable for us for a long time, which is basically take split PowerShell and make it huge on one end and make it tiny on the other end, and get down to something nothing and just the runtime and the ability to import modules and execute functions and all that, the language. And then on the other hand, you'd give somebody like all the dev tools in the world, a lot more like Anaconda, and every kind of module and all the YAML and TOML and whatever the heck you want in this thing, and then just
all scenarios instead of anyone.
Yeah.
What's the reaction to that? I mean, would people be interested in having a jumbo distribution that was totally batteries included?
Like we shipped it with, plaster, platypus, pester, all the, everything that anybody could want, but not the one you go and ship in your container. Sorry, I heard somebody.
I'm mostly concerned about the bottom end. So, like I'm doing the OpenSSH automation and PowerShell core, and then even at work we start with a Scratch ISO for CentOS. So to me, the very, very bottom and what is considered in there, and then if there's a next class up, which I just don't want to go out, I just can't afford to the assumption of going out anywhere to get anything. Now, of course, if there's a baseline that is Bootstrap baseline, at least I could copy that manually and put it in some sort of packaging and inject it without having to use commandlets to get it. But for instance, the very first version of Nano, invoke web request was broken, and I didn't want to do a call to Windows Update as a matter of just getting OpenSSH on the machine. So I worked around it by using NuGet, which would go ahead and pull stuff down. So those are examples. It gets really hard when something like rebooting the machine is not in that level. So I still think it'd be interesting to have classes of what happens and what is core, and a nice definition around that you can throw back at the community when somebody makes a move that they want some bizarre set of functionality in the core or in the Bootstrap level.
I think like the scenario that I more envision is that for instance, we would emit this ultra minimal thing as like a Docker container, right? And then you would maybe fork from that Docker container to say, hey, I actually want to build a new image that has, this set of commandlets that I include as my baseline, and then you've built a Docker image that is, your version of PowerShell, and this may also be a thing that we want to expose via the MSI, right? Like I've floated this to Steve before, like maybe the MSI should just be a crap ton of checkboxes that give you the ability to do a very, very custom install, and that individual modules or even modules that we go and get from the PowerShell gallery may be part of that nested tree. So it's not.
Yeah, that's a very interesting idea. And the case I would make is that like layers 1 and layers 2 stay very minimal, and the binaries are included in that MSI. Right. And then after you go above that, sure, if you don't have internet access, you ain't getting this stuff. But the very bottom levels, it would be cool if we could get something defined that ships but doesn't balloon the MSI.
Yeah, no, I think that's the goal. It's like they're probably, like, in my opinion, the batteries we include with the MSI would be around what we ship today, from an order of magnitude of size, and then you'd have the ability to go get all kinds of useful community modules that we still don't really feel comfortable even shipping in the distro that we put out now with PowerShell Core. But then you'd have the ability to also remove from your installation a bunch of the stuff you do ship in it today, so that you get a more minimal one if you want it. But yeah, I think the MSI is like, the size of the MSI right now is about where I like it. I don't think we would want to make it any bigger.
I guess if you're going to be multi-plat, you really mean MSIX, though.
Yes, and I still have not deep dove on that. I know you gave me a bunch of good resources on that, but yeah, that would be nice. Although I don't know what the cross-platform adoption looks like either. Push too hard on things that are going to.
Right. So then I agree with you, but then that would also mean don't put it in MSI either. Whatever it is, it would have to be multi-plat.
For clients, we're going to have to either use MSI or MSIX for Windows.
For Windows, yeah, but we could theoretically do this with like packages.microsoft.com, where if we split things up, we could give people meta packages that have dependencies on smaller packages that collectively make up the PowerShell core package that we. I think there's a way to do it even within RPM or dev, but it would take some. Cool.
Like question about classes, yeah. I mean, I think improvements to classes has always been on our mind. It's just a resourcing constraint issue. It's I think maybe probably not this call, but in a future call we'll talk more about what we want to do for 6.2. That is on the table, but it's not in plan. Something I would love to do, but it's a math problem.
There was a question around auto-installing dependent modules a la Yum and pip. I think PowerShell Get does that today.
It does.
Is there something that's not there in PowerShell Get that you needed, Jeremy?
Oh, no, I haven't actually tested that yet, so that's already.
Oh, okay.
My bad.
Yeah, we traverse dependent modules in the module manifest and get there.
The one requirement on that, Keith, is PowerShell Get will only pick up a module from the same location, so we won't traverse to another URL. We decided that installing things from a random, unknown source was a bad thing to put into the PowerShell gallery.
Even with multiple trusted repositories?
Well,
It's like if it's trusted, you should traverse it.
we had that conversation, and since the PowerShell gallery itself is not trusted
Yes.
by default, we stopped. It's like, okay. So we could build that in for an on-premise thing.
Yeah.
But so far we've had multiple conversations with folks, and people who build their own on-premise repositories tend to build one. So traversing multiples doesn't make sense. If somebody has a scenario where they are indeed traversing multiple trusted repositories, would love to hear about it.
I have one.
And raise issues in the. Say again?
I said I have one. Customization packages for chocolatey packages. So you create a customization package with settings, and then you just include the chocolatey package directly. And so even in, it might make sense to have two repos even if you own your own, but that's one scenario.
Okay.
Do you want an issue?
Yeah, I was going to say probably the best thing to do can you open up if it's not already there. There have been requests for this in the GitHub PowerShell gallery repo. There's an issue there. I'll see if I can dig it up. But if not, just create a new one on this so that I can understand the details. Thank you. Appreciate it a lot.
The other thing I've been wondering about for a while is should we have some capability to auto-download modules? So if you have a using module statement in a script and you don't have that module and you have a trusted module repository, then you wouldn't have to do a separate download and install step. It would download and install it for you. Maybe transient, but more likely for the current user. Does that sound scary to people, or does that sound useful?
Say again?
Scary if on by default.
Yeah.
Scary in the chat.
I don't think any other package manager does that.
Well, if you use JavaScript in web pages, downloads modules
Yeah.
dynamically because it has to.
And we also know that when there was one of the whole reasons behind the concerns and the security level we built into PowerShell Get and PowerShell Gallery was when we were building this thing out was when the guy deleted a couple of things off of NPM and large sections of exactly that. And so our security guys said, we don't want to repeat that.
Right. That was
so
more
we went pretty severely towards the higher security realm. And I'm not saying that that's right. This is where there's always a balance. And
that wasn't security. That was a module owner decided to remove his module that everybody else depended on.
it broke all sorts of stuff.
Right, but security doesn't address that. because
But our security team was reading that going, oh, bad things can happen here.
Yeah.
And
oh,
that's
Yes.
what motivated the design, and that's all I'm saying that.
Yeah.
So all I'm suggesting is, in the absence of lots of specific cases to work against to moderate it, we are, that's the design that we have.
yeah, yeah. Well, the scenario I was thinking of was things like AWS Lambda or
Yeah.
Azure Functions, where you want to put up a script, but having to do all the extra configuration to install modules is tricky.
Yeah.
The script could just install its own dependencies, and it might be a specific thing to Azure Functions or Lambda.
In those cases, like it seems like maybe a preference variable would
Yeah.
solve the scary parts.
Nick is kind of suggesting that on the chat. He's suggesting that there be some confirm action.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, in my mind, it's less, like at the very least, we should throw an error that says, hey, these aren't trusted repositories.
Well, I'm saying is
Can't get
they
between
didn't have
these
to be
things.
trusted repositories, or it wouldn't work.
Yeah.
Like you,
Well,
you
then
wouldn't do
if
it
they
from
were
non-trusted
trusted, what would be the scary part? I don't really.
Well, right now, we don't, it's not contingent on that. It's just binary. We don't support it.
Right. But I'm saying, so
Yeah.
let's say, because I think, like Heath Hill raises this one, like we have an Artifactory-based corporate repo.
Yeah.
Like, if we depend on external modules in the PS Gallery, will that work? And I would say
No, it doesn't today.
Wouldn't today. But I would think that if a user wanted to opt in to trusting the PS Gallery, or if they had an internal PS Gallery, where they took those dependencies in and they had two trusted repositories that were both internal, then it feels like the trust level they've upped to the point that they're okay with those, being pulled from each other, and that's a reasonable.
Yeah, and I love that. And by the way, I don't know who was speaking earlier, but we just hadn't ever encountered a scenario that was real, other than Keith making something up out of his head. and the engineers go, okay, Keith, you made that one up, and I have to agree. So concrete scenarios help.
Right. Yeah, because the other approach to something like Lambda is to do what DSC does, where you look at the script that you want to run, you run a tool that zips up everything it needs into a single bundle, and then when DSC runs, like this is for the Azure Resource Extension, when you publish to Azure Resource Extension, it zips everything up into a blob in Azure, and then the Resource Extension downloads and runs that configuration. But it already has all the modules it's going to use.
Right.
Because in DSC with the pull server does download and install modules automatically.
Right. The DSC pull server, the setup of the pull server establishes the trust up front.
It is by de facto a trusted repository.
Right. And it's a single trusted repository. It doesn't actually download from multiple sources. So that's really
I
where
don't remember whether we did that or not.
we don't.
It might have been in plan though.
It was. It's not there today. So again, it comes down to single location can be trusted, and all that works. And then the cross location import is currently not supported by any of the PowerShell mechanisms today. The core PowerShell mechanisms. There's some good stuff from Chocolatey. There's some good stuff from other folks. NuGet supports it. But as I said, those were the design choices and one.
Yeah, there's one other question here that I scrolled back up for from Jonas around whether it would be nice, or that it would be nice to have a trusted repo for modules that were, quote, rubber stamped by the team or community.
Rated gallery.
Yeah, a more rated trusted gallery.
There's a couple of things that we're looking at. Those of you who are aware of it know we're doing some stuff in the gallery to align more closely with NuGet v3, and one of the elements of that is to have trusted namespaces. And we're going to be very constrained about how we establish that trusted namespace. That's probably a starting point for us to start building that capability. Like Azure RM.star and then filtering out the ones that are not from the Azure team, we can establish that trusted namespace and then build additional features into PowerShell Get to deal with it.
Yeah, I would say the only issue I see there is that the currently trust level is, from PowerShell Get's perspective, is all or nothing on the repository, right?
Today, yes. It's binary.
Right. So
Yeah.
it's
But and that's why I'm saying is we have the new features that we're bringing in from the newer version of NuGet, which is our back end, is going to allow us to add new features to PowerShell Get because it has the server-side components that make it valuable.
right.
And the one thing that I will say, Trevor asked about the gallery UI update, and yes, it's coming. And I will say that the initial views are not what the homepage is going to look like, but it is definitely getting a UI refresh. We wanted to get the functionality out there so people would beat on it and we'd see if we broke anything. So far, we haven't. Well, there are some things that are changing, but the UI refresh in a couple of weeks, we will get a lot closer to the final UI.
Should we reserve some time to talk about
Yeah, that's a lot about the gallery.
non-terminating literal?
Yes,
Yes.
we do want to get to that.
Yeah, we have
10
Tim
minutes.
and stuff, and if we have sometime at the end, Tyler might have a demo.
Yeah, I think this is all good stuff. I'm gonna move on from this conversation because we do want to get a take on the Get Star stuff. So the issue here, I'm gonna close this VM because I think it's stealing my mouse. Nope, that wasn't it. It just wants to disappear. So basically, the question is whether or not commandlets should have a convention for their gets when a specific input is given to the get on whether or not that get returns a non-terminating error because it could not find that specific instance of the thing that was asked for, or if it should just throw null without a non-terminating error. And Joel has a good set of examples here that he shows. Is for instance, when you run get child item on an empty folder, right, today, if we go to that empty folder, it's going to return just null with nothing, right? We've got this empty folder here, get child item, empty folder, that returns nothing. If I put empty folder 2, it's going to say, no, this doesn't exist. I don't know about it. I don't actually know if this is a non-terminating or terminating error because it's still my own pet peeve that it's impossible to figure out. But not impossible, but a pain in the butt. But yeah, like this all came up because we changed format or update format data, where in the past, had I put foo here, it would have just returned null, right? And so the question is, as a general, or was it get format data or update format data? Get format data. Sorry.
Get type data also has the same.
Right, so normally this returns null, and this is because I'm on preview 4. But the nightly, this will actually return a non-terminating error, right? So, so we think that it's probably a pretty common practice for people to take gets and pipe them into sets or updates, and then to want most, if like let's say I have, in that get. That I'm iterating through, or I'm doing a for each that's going into a get, that I find 9 of the 10 elements that I looped through, and that I want to still update those 9 elements, but just because the 10th one got found doesn't mean that I want to terminate. That's kind of where we're looking at, and in my opinion, we should just make non-terminating errors kind of the norm because they allow you to continue, and they are respected by error action, which confuses everybody because they expect terminating errors to also be respected by error action, even though that's sometimes impossible. But I'm rambling now, so
but that's a separate issue.
Separate issue.
So I think what we kind of ended up is I think there's general agreement that if it's not a wildcard or being something that's applied towards a filter, and some of Joel's examples were really filtering, then if the item is not found because that's what you specified, then the expectation is that a non-terminating error is returned. So I think
That's the official convention.
Yeah, so I don't think there's any huge controversy on that one. I think the real discussion is, should we make a change to have consistency across commands that we're aware of that are not consistent, because that is on the borderline of a breaking change. Like you can argue whether it's technically a breaking change.
How's a breaking change?
No, I'm just saying the impact side. So is there actually an impact if we make this change? And I think some of the examples that at least Joel had on his reply would still be fine because it's a non-terminator. You would just get this output, but functionally the rest of the pipeline should work the same either way.
Yeah, in my mind, the one like get type data is the most obvious one that we would also need to change if we wanted consistency.
If we maintain the change that we merged for format data, we absolutely need to make the change for type data because those two by themselves are not consistent.
But for instance, like I don't think that these ones where say you set clipboard null. I don't have the clipboard because it's let's see,
Windows.
This. That's actually my set clipboard null.
Pipe to
Like,
clipboard. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, that would have worked too. Sorry, but the like this sort of thing where something is null and I get a null back, like this is expected to me, right? It's the same thing with like get PS session. I haven't specified a PS session. If I say this, I would expect, to get some error back because foo doesn't exist.
Which is what you get.
Yeah. There's also this one, like get command dash verb build. This to me, the verb is acting more like a filter than an explicit ask for an instance of something. So.
If you do get command and name a command that doesn't exist.
Right. If I say, well, there's wildcard, that's going to give me null. But if I say, build foo, well, that's, I understand why.
And that behavior is actually really irritating.
Why is that?
Because the only way I can test for the existence of a command is get command. And so if I want to test for the existence of this command and then, do something, right? So I have to suppress that error. I have to do extra stuff to suppress the error in order to test for the command. Now, if we had a test commandlet,
that would solve that problem.
Different.
Yeah.
But with a lot of our tests, a lot of our gets are also effectively tests.
Yeah. There's many times where we do get command name, error action, silently continue, and then we check to see whether it's null or not.
Right.
Yeah, that seems right to me, though.
But I also agree, like having the test would actually be a better solution than to have it quietly not return an error, which is, I think, oral, at least in this room, saying the same thing.
Are you saying, because you're saying the fact that this returns null is the annoying with the wildcard?
No. The fact that it generates an error. If I want to see if a particular command exists on my system or not, and then maybe go to install a module, if it doesn't exist, then I have to suppress the error.
Today.
I want to be able to detect whether.
Why do you need to suppress the error if it's non-terminating?
It still shows up.
Because it shows up.
Yeah.
So?
It's not an error.
In this case, the point Bruce is making, and what we do in a lot of our scripts, is that you don't want to show because you're handling that error, right? I mean, the other option is you could also say error action stop and try catch it, but that's.
Or no, you can toss it to bool, right?
Mechanic that we have. Sorry.
I just do type accelerator to bool with a error action, but I do agree that there's been a misstep here in that there's a lot of test commandlets that by all means should have been made by the original vision, right, and aren't, and we've got these workarounds.
Exactly. So that's what I think makes sense to me is like having a consistency for get, and then we should probably add a test command because we even ourselves on a team we use it quite a bit. So that to me seems like a no-brainer.
Well, and also just like when you do DSC, the question is if you're building a get, shouldn't you have a test? And if the answer is no, fine, but that question should always be raised and answered, right? For any time you do a get, for building a new get for anything, the question is, does it merit a test as well?
Yeah.
Yes.
For DSC, the get is fairly optional.
Well, DSC, yeah, but DSC forces the question because we're all used to building, because it enforces the idea of desired state boundary, right? But where with commandlets, it obviously hasn't forced the question because there's a whole bunch that don't have tests that would be nice to have tests.
And if we start having the test normal and command listed, you can easily build DSC resources around this. You can auto-generate this.
Well, not typically, no.
Well, I mean, conceptually.
Yeah.
You may not want to.
Not quite, because sometimes the item code design is
Sure.
different.
Yeah, that part is the key thing, but
Yes, I figure we should have an ensure verb, so you can say ensure item, and it will create the item if it doesn't exist, and not give you an error if it does exist.
Then we would be able to easily convert those into.
Yeah.
Well, you would probably need a switch that says what is.
Spell a word.
To implement it into
Yeah.
DSC.
Why can't I spell realistically, people?
Because realistically, you can't spell.
realistic. You need I see.
So many
Wow.
jokes.
All right, but I think the answer I didn't get, I wanted to get is whether or not
great.
the
was a
breaking
great one.
change is something we should take,
Quick
so that we
on
can
that.
we can kind of standardize on this.
Well, it was technically accurate and snarky.
Well, let's see.
One shouldn't expect these things from me.
Command is inside an if-else if, it automatically suppresses the error. That's a really big breaking change.
Yeah, no, commands are not aware of syntax at all by design. So,
All this
that
chat
would
is,
be really, really weird.
Go ahead.
it's all this talk about this issue is making me insecure about some of my code. So, if I do a test command or a get command, error action silently continue, and then cast that to bool, is that like 100% or at least 99% reliable?
Yeah.
To use in an if statement. Okay, cool.
For that specific command, but yes.
Yeah. So it's okay.
But that's part of the problem, is that the behavior varies on the commands. It's inconsistent.
There are some commands with bugs.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's always commands with bugs, but even within the commands that don't technically have bugs, they're inconsistent in how they handle this. Like get module, if the module doesn't exist, returns nothing. You don't need error action silently continue. It wouldn't hurt. And the other problem with get command silently continue is that it might be generating errors for other reasons and the command doesn't exist, and you've now hidden those reasons.
Yeah, agree. We definitely should have a test command. The question I still have open is whether or not we make changes to.
Is there an issue tracking that?
For test command?
Yeah.
No.
Just what you just said.
Well, I think
still have an issue with
we were using that discussion.
Yeah, I know.
The meta discussion.
That's what I just said
Because
here, but
at the end of the day, for the 6.1 release, I think we have two choices, which is we revert the change we took for format data, or we apply that change to the known commandlets so they're consistent. Like we can't leave it the way it is right now. It's inconsistent in between those.
I would.
I mean, we could take this change.
The
to
only other one I
6.2.
know is update type data, but there's no way we're going to come up with a full enumeration of them for everything to be consistent. But I would suspect that things are already inconsistent.
No, they're inconsistent
Like,
today. Yes,
but-
they're consistently inconsistent.
Yeah,
So it seems like maybe the right thing to do is revert that in
it
6.1.
might be.
It sounds right to me.
Okay.
And then I would say in 6.2 we should merge it and then immediately get to work enumerating the rest of them that we want to be consistent and merge those.
Because the problem with changing them is that in the absence of the test commands, there are going to be a bunch of places
Right.
where commands that silently return nothing are being used in tests.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, those tests will break.
I do want to say one thing because we're over time, and I know people are already starting to drop. We have started to enumerate stuff we may want to support in 6.2, just an internal list, like total brainstorm, super flat list. We'd like to probably publish that pretty soon, you think, Steve?
Yeah.
Once it's in a publicly consumable state. And then I will probably tweet about it and talk about it in the next community call. I also just see this here real quick. Keith Hill, believe the new ConPT white support coming in Condos will make the interactive SSH experience with PowerShell and client and server side behave better. Right now, the CLI experience isn't great with text randomly moving down several lines below where the prompt is. Absolutely. And I am no longer the PM for OpenSSH, and Keith just walked out the door here, but I do know that we have been working with the console team since I was still the PM to support CompTY and exactly in those scenarios. Unfortunately, that stuff is not going to work down level. But we're going to conditionally, branch ourselves to the old crappy experience down level, and then anywhere where we have ConpTY, we're going to consume it. And I don't think that support's done. I think that it's going to continue to get better as more releases of SSH come out. So yeah, it's ConpTY is like the thing we were waiting for forever. And I don't know if anybody saw. It was really, really anticipated. In many cases, I'd actually like to have SDK classes exposed, matching the commands on top. Both get command and test command should use the same SDK class, and I could use the class try get value when I needed it. That would be great. I don't know that that's a refactor that we could fund right now, but that sounds like the right private architecture.
The commandlets are not designed to be reused. Like, they're not APIs.
I think he's saying you could implement a single commandlet or implement an API that would implement its try get value, and then you could call into that class's try get value in your test foo implementation. Sure. So you could write one piece of code.
Yeah, we can write a bunch of new APIs.
Yeah.
Which is what it amounts to.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily making existing APIs public.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I'm going to post this one in the notes too, because the CompTY will make Open SSH better.
There's also been a bunch of changes that were done for not Azure PowerShell. I'm blanking on PowerShell and Azure. Tin Yun's thing. Azure Shell.
Cloud Shell?
Cloud Shell.
Yeah.
Cloud Shell. Yeah, there's a bunch of work done both in the console host code, or the console class code in .NET.
Yes, JNU made a bunch of fixes into .NET's console APIs to help Cloud Shell.
And then also in the PowerShell as well, and
in the
did stuff
PS3
in the PS3 line.
Yeah.
So there's been a bunch of fixes in various places that should be in the next release. That's 6.1.
Although I know there are also some that we're trying to get into PS3 land that have not been merged yet there, right. So that's something those will be coming.
Yeah.
Being a later point.
But the Cloud Shell has certainly been driving a lot of improvements into the user experience on Linux in a terminal, in an external, whatever.
Yeah, they drove some improvements on the Windows side at first, but then when they switched over to Linux, and then we needed to make some improvements to the Linux side. But they're fully like Xterm JS now, I think. So it's all
and
it's all real.
The console
real
experience is amazingly much better.
Oh yeah, so much
from the initial previews.
Yeah, totally.
Based on this work.
And PowerCode, yes, the commandlets we were talking about before is basically like it's just like a view model layer.
Mm-hmm.
I kept telling Jeffrey that the console had to improve, and he could only shrug. Yes, Rich Turner's great. If you guys don't follow Rich Turner _MS, Rich Turn _MS or Turner _MS on Twitter, you should. He's the one that authored that blog, and he probably has his Twitter in that blog. I'm going to put it in the notes.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we are 7 minutes over, and we have to run because we got to go back to our jobs. But you guys have all been awesome. This was a fantastic call, and I will try to keep my streak going in getting this one up by the end of the week, possibly by the end of the day. I'm really feeling it. Yes, Rich Turner MS. See you guys later. Thanks for joining, and we will see you in a month.
Bye.